So we're now going to hand it over to Dan to demonstrate a tool that is not tied to the state commission, that is more oriented around local communities, local redistricting processes. Dan, take it away.
Yeah, so I'm going to take a few minutes to demonstrate a program called Districtr. You can find it at districtr.org. It was created by the very talented metric geometry and gerrymandering group over at Tufts University. So let's dive in. When you first arrive at the site, you can choose to either draw. Well, you'll head over down to the map. So obviously, let's go to California. They have info for all 50 states. As you can see here, Districtr allows you to choose either drawing districts or communities. We're going to demo the community side, right, by clicking here and doing it out of block groups. To show you some of the programs, bells and whistles, I'm going to use a community I'm familiar with as an example. So I'm going to start by typing in downtown Los Angeles as this thing loads. Downtown Los Angeles here. So the interface is pretty similar to GPS programs you'll be familiar with, like Google Maps or Apple Maps. So I typed in a neighborhood to get where I wanted to go, but the software includes addresses and landmarks of all sorts as well. So, we envision a community mapping session starting with the identification of certain landmarks. Which like I mentioned, you can also kind of plug in here. So just as an example, it could be all sorts of places: transportation routes, houses of worship, park spaces. So those are kind of what we're gonna demo here. So I'm gonna start by looking for Pershing Square, which it has a couple of things going for it. It's sort of both a little bit of a playground, park space, people can sit by and have lunch. Also has the metro stop, Pershing Square metro stop with the same name nearby. So what we can do is go down the right-hand corner, mark important places. So then you'll have this ability to kind of drop some markers. We'll drop one on this kind of square itself first. And what you do here is name it. And you can kind of describe, why it's important to the community. It's, useful green space, in an urban area, a place for kids to play. You can kind of, drop a narrative here. You may want to say, especially in a place that's, sort of populated by cars and parking lots and buildings, to have kind of a park space is really important for kids. So that's sort of one, kind of an example of how to mark one location, and we'll just kind of do a very quick version of a couple others you might want to add as well. So you look for a new important place. Maybe we'll say, there's a business that really kind of centers the downtown community called The Last Bookstore. Again, you can go to the important places, drop it here where The Last Bookstore is, name it, and describe, this really anchors the community, this business. It's an important meeting place. There are amazing book talks for adults and for kids alike. We can do the same for a different location. Maybe we'll say like a place of worship. We'll go to there's a Buddhist temple, right? Just to the east of this is Little Tokyo. So we might move over to Little Tokyo and pick the Higashi Hongaji Buddhist temple. Again, you can kind of name it here. Describe how it's a center of community activity for people who live in the surrounding Little Tokyo area. It's got a daycare center that a lot of people use who either work, live in the area. And really this kind of, makes up really kind of the core of what some people might see as their downtown community. So we'll move now, for the, if you've got a big community mapping session, it's entirely possible that you identify just a bunch of different places. For the purposes of brevity, I'm going to stop there. What we move to next is the actual sort of painting of the community. So we've anchored our notion of what this community of interest is by starting with sort of specific landmarks. Now we'll move over to the paintbrush function over here. You have different brush sizes you can use for community mapping purposes. Usually the smallest one makes the most sense. So we'll paint the census block groups that make up the areas we've marked. So there's sort of the Pershing Square area, that bookstore we noted, the metro stop, that's kind of an important transportation hub is kind of a slightly different one. So we'll kind of capture this to make sure we're really getting the community. And then, in this community mapping session, you may find there's kind of a robust discussion about whether the areas in between are kind of also make up the community. And maybe we'll say that in this session, the folks believe that was the case. So you've kind of got, with that, your downtown LA community. Just one other kind of tool here is you can also switch the colors. If in part of the discussion, you realize you've identified some areas that maybe are very distinctly not the community, like Civic Center, maybe up here, Bunker Hill, then you can sort of mark those a different color. So for both the communities you've created, you come over here if you want to give kind of a qualitative description. Name the community, describe it as very, walkable, very urban, restaurants, whatever the case may be. And you have your community marked down. So there are some other tools you can use to kind of examine what you've created. You move over to data layers. You can overlap different racial communities to see where they live. Mark it here. You maybe want to look at the Hispanic population of this area, either as shaded regions or size circles, which is sometimes a little easier to see up against the painted areas here. You can do the same with voting age population. And you can also kind of evaluate the demographics of the areas you've created, how they the racial demographics compare to the rest of the state, that downtown LA area, that community 2, which we didn't quite name, but up north of there. And so you've got your community, and you can use all these tools to both examine it and to tell a story about it. If you want to collaborate on this, you can use the share button up here. The map that you've created has a unique URL, which is right here. You can share that URL to collaborate with others. If you're working in coalition, folks who want to build on this map, they can use that URL. However, if they add to it, it'll create a new URL, so your work is saved right here at this same website. You can also work with the team at Tufts University to create a tag for the event. So maybe this is, CA Common Cause, but and break it down even further to Team LA, downtown, whatever works to identify it best. So you can, if you're working with a bunch of different groups that are doing these maps, they can kind of coalesce into kind of one digital space where you can find everybody's work. Just the last piece I'll quickly mention, similar to what Kiana had pointed out about the ways you can kind of share this. So one way is to just share the URL, which will encompass all of the, the places you've mapped and the qualitative descriptions you've given, the narrative. But you can also do this as, excuse me, like a PDF and other sort of files, mapping files that'll make it compatible with other mapping programs that maybe partners are using or that decision makers themselves who are drawing the maps are using. And I think that really is the long and short of it.
So thank you, Dan. Let me ask you a couple follow-up questions. First for Dan, I think a lot of people have heard about gerrymandering. And what they know about gerrymandering is these long, skinny, squiggly, weird-looking districts are usually a sign that somebody's being disenfranchised or a community's being silenced, or their voting power is being taken away. Now, you just drew a community for us that wasn't a simple rectangle. It had some funny shapes to it. Is that okay? What should community members think if their community of interest that they have drawn has some funny corners, shapes, and angles?
Yeah, I think, because sort of those ugly districts that you described can often be evidence of bad behavior on the fact of map drawers. We've kind of placed a little bit too much emphasis on, the compactness and sort of looking pretty. But we know that, in sort of very, simple circles or squares is not how communities live. People that have similar interests may be spread in sort of different ways around a city, or around a neighborhood. So I think we should really place our emphasis on, keeping communities that have similar interests together. And I think the shapes, again, we can kind of look at that as evidence of malfeasance on the part of legislators or city council members who may be trying to manipulate those areas. But in and of itself, it's really not problematic.
Yeah, so funny looking districts can be evidence of gerrymandering and disenfranchisement but they do not automatically equal gerrymandering or disenfranchisement. Sometimes it's just the best way to keep a community together in one district, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, spot on.
Kiana, a follow-up question for you. So let's say community members come together, they host a small community meeting, they talk about what their community looks like, they identify the landmarks and where people live and where people worship and where people work and where people play and where people gather, and they draw a map of their community using either the tool you demonstrated or the tool that Dan demonstrated, and they submit it. Is that it? Are they done? Or are there more steps that they should take?
Yeah, so I think that's a good starting point, is to start with one of the tools that we described today to kind of get your community on the map and kind of clarify among your community, what the key kind of characteristics are that you want to use when talking about your community. So I think you can go ahead and submit your map to the commission or to your local government. But I wouldn't stop there. I would definitely look at the State Redistricting Commission's planned hearings. They're beginning hearings in June to kind of hear directly from communities about their communities of interest. And so I would follow up on your submission by attending one of these hearings, kind of tuning into the conversation among the commission and the conversation from other communities, and also chiming in at those hearings to kind of testify in support of the map that you submitted. And I will flag too, actually, to help people in this effort, Common Cause recently created a community of interest template testimony. So if you go to our website, commoncause.org/local redistricting 2021, it's about a 4-page document that kind of walks you through the various sort of elements of your testimony and what kind of language you can use to provide this testimony at a redistricting hearing.
And Kiana, would you recommend that people find sort of allies and colleagues in the community and coordinate their testimony?
Yeah, I think it would be really good for communities to have like an internal discussion about, how they want to describe their community before they submit a map or before they testify. So I would definitely encourage folks to start thinking now about what the key qualities are that define your community, and talk to your neighbors about it, and kind of begin that work now and kind of preparing your testimony and how you're going to organize around your community.
Got it. Understood. Thanks to you both. Any final thoughts before we begin to wrap up?
If you want to follow interesting gerrymandering news, redistricting news, the amazing activity going on around the country and California, you can sign up to the Gerrymander Gazette. Google it. I assume nobody else has used that ridiculous name for a newsletter, so you should be able to find it by Googling it on Common Cause's website.
Authored by Dan Vicuña, the imminent Dan Vicuña, a fabulous way to get updated on all sorts of redistricting news. You can also follow Dan on Twitter at Dan Vicuña if you want more redistricting news as well. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in and for checking out our All About Redistricting live stream this month. Kiana, Dan, thank you for contributing and leading those demonstrations. We'll be reconvening in the middle of May for our next monthly live stream. For more regular updates on our work, please follow us on social media. You can follow us on Twitter at Common Cause CA. You can follow me on Twitter at _Jonathan Stein. And you can also, as I mentioned at the top of the quote unquote show, you can also sign up for our email list at commoncause.org/California. As always, we appreciate you and your support of California Common Cause. Thank you for being with us in this fight. Please stay safe. See you next month.